In 1920, a constitutional amendment, the 18th Amendment, restricting the manufacture and sale of alcoholic drinks went into effect. In other words, Prohibition started, and it would remain until 1933. It would write some of the deadliest chapters in United States history and expose the flaws in its democracy. So let's start. Prohibition was the culmination of many years of effort by organized sobriety groups, which blamed alcohol consumption for a variety of social ills: poverty, unemployment, domestic violence. The first wave of the abstaining movement in the United States began at a period of tremendous religious rebirth, some 100 years before the law prohibiting all drinks containing more than half a ml of alcohol. It earned popularity in the early 20th century, bringing together apparently incongruous social groupings. The increasing Protestant middle class, wary of impoverished Catholic immigrants, particularly the Irish, who supported the anti-alcohol campaign. Employers endorsed it in the hope that it would boost work productivity. It was even backed by members of the KKK who linked drinking and subsequent criminality to fellow citizens of the so-called wrong skin color. Contrary to popular belief, it was also backed by African Americans from the country's south, who faithfully followed religious instructions from their previous owners. It was supposedly fully backed by women. The backbone of the sober movement was made up of worried ladies who wanted to close the pubs, the filthy places where their upper halves got drunk, making them angry and their wallets empty. They were most active during the First World War, when their husbands were fighting on the front lines. The Prohibition War Act was established during a period of war, with the excuse that grains should be utilized for food rather than drinking during those trying times. However, the National Prohibition Act did not become law until 1919. The Volstead Act, named after its supporter, Congressman Andrew Volstead, entered into force on March 17, 1920. And so the prohibition officially began. It was heralded by supporters of so-called the Dries, those who sought to ban alcohol as the ultimate triumph of virtue against vice. However, it became evident very quickly that prohibition was a farce, not to mention incredibly expensive. Americans had no intention of giving up drinking. Until 1929, the courts were swamped with cases. 500,000 individuals were imprisoned for breaching prohibition rules, and the jail population was more than double what had been expected. Following the closure of the pubs, illicit alcohol outlets became hangouts for wet brothers and sisters. The typical speakeasy, as the establishments were dubbed in jargon, because to the fact that they were said to be under the voice, was disguised between the facade of a restaurant's or hairdresser's salon. Those who were let in by a suspicious doorkeeper may, of course, get drunk to their heart's content if they could pay for it. The constant threat of arrest added a new level of socializing, providing an escape from the mundane present. They started off as gentlemen's clubs. Free-spirited females, on the other hand, were soon drawn in by an atmosphere of hazardous glamour. Women began drinking in public with males, relishing the excess of the wild 20s, which was previously taboo. They smoked cigarettes, listened to jazz music, and danced, some of them with partners of darker skin color, which was before unthinkable. Alcohol, as if by magic, removed gender and social boundaries. Another lovely custom that spread during Prohibition was tipping waiters and gatekeepers. This habit, which was formerly considered an aristocratic behavior, has now evolved into a genuine show of appreciation. The Green Door was a secret sign of recognition for illicit alcohol stores in Chicago. This tradition carries on in one of the city's most popular pubs, which has been in operation since 1921, called the Green Tavern. The color green is also associated with the Prohibition era. Congressmen looking for a decent drink had their own guy. George L. Cassidy, a smuggler who could obtain even the most rare alcoholic beverages, was the big shot on Capitol Hill. For 5 years, until 1925 when he was arrested, he delivered high-quality whiskey, bourbon, and gin to thirsty politicians. Because he was wearing a green hat at the time of his arrest, he became known as the man in the green hat. In principle, the government's decision to ban alcohol was based on health and moral concerns, but in fact, things worked a little differently. The restriction had an unintended consequence. During Prohibition, alcohol consumption reached one of its peak levels in the country's history. The forbidden fruit, as the saying goes, is the sweetest. Furthermore, like mushrooms after rain, illicit distilleries sprouted, and the selling of such alcohol, called moonshine, came into the hands of organized crime. Because the revenues were so high, brutal conflicts between gangs erupted, with many members of police enforcement on their payrolls. Frustrated by such events, government authorities decided to adopt a new means of discouraging alcohol use: death. They ordered that industrial alcohol, which is utilized in the production of varnishes, fuels, and medicines, be poisoned. This industrial alcohol was essentially stolen in large quantities by illicit manufacturers and then processed for resale. This mad tactic, known as the chemical war of prohibition, has proven to be quite effective. It is believed that a nationwide industrial alcohol poisoning campaign killed at least 10,000 Americans. It is unknown how many of them ended blinded or otherwise injured. The poor, who couldn't buy pricey refined booze, drew the thickest end, as you might expect, for what one coroner dubbed a national extermination experiment. No one was ever held guilty. One particularly odd government employee stood out in the war against defiant restaurateurs, smugglers, and mobsters. Isador Easy Einstein, an unattractive, obese, balding, slightly squinting middle-aged guy, quit his stable position at the post office to join the newly formed Federal Prohibition Unit. Being more cunning than a fox, he became the most powerful law enforcement tool. His strategy was to just be an ordinary guy, since even though he was unattractive, he was quite a charming and talkative gentleman. So criminals gladly sat at the table with him and loosened their tongues, thinking that this one offers no threat. Committed to his job, Einstein gradually began to include parts of what he knew no one would accept: truth. Smiling warmly, he pretended to be a federal agent to the subject of the inquiry, to which everyone burst out laughing. He would even go so far as to flaunt his police badge in front of them, and many people would comment on how they never seen such a poor counterfeit in their life. He also showed an exceptional aptitude for camouflage. He frequently performed this with collaborator Mo Smith. According to the ATF, he apprehended offenders disguised as a German cucumber trader, an impoverished Polish nobleman, a Hungarian musician, a Jewish undertaker, a French waiter, an Italian fruit merchant, a Russian fisherman, and a Chinese laundry guy. He even disguised himself as a black guy, a Harlem pimp, and even had an incredible victory in partnership with Smith when he uncovered one of the largest illicit alcohol shelters in the country, playing his own wife. In the fewer than 5 years they worked together, Easy and Mo arrested 4,932 smugglers, accounting for roughly 2/3 of all prohibition-related arrests in New York City. Even the famous Elliot Ness, who followed Al Capone's gang across Chicago, couldn't match their numbers. After quitting the police service, Einstein pursued a career as a traveling salesperson, which needed a comparable set of talents. The Great Experiment, as President Herbert Hoover dubbed Prohibition, came to an end shortly after Franklin Roosevelt took office. It came to an end on May 5, 1933, when the United States Constitution's 21st Amendment was ratified. On that day, Roosevelt utters the immortal phrase, "I believe this would be a good time for a beer." Surprisingly, the 18th Amendment, which was repealed by the 21st Amendment, is still the only amendment that has been deleted from the United States Constitution. Alcohol control was entrusted to the states, who in certain cases delegated it to municipal governments. There are hundreds of sober counties in the Bible Belt states, where faith is a major component of culture, where the sale of alcohol is highly regulated. This concludes the story of Prohibition. If you want to know more, Please subscribe, leave a like, and see you in the next episode of History 7.